Welcome to Wild and Exposed, your number one adventure, nature, and outdoor photography podcast. Wild and Exposed is hosted by Mike Amaro, Ron Hayes, and Jason Loftus. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to another episode of Wild and Exposed. Everyone's ready but Mark.
As usual.
As usual.
I'm wearing pants.
Going to doing a little catch-up episode. I'm catching up with what these three have been doing or are about to do. And I'm doing the same thing that I was doing last time when we said that I didn't want to talk about it. But first, right out of the gate, we're going to lead it out with some pro tips today. We haven't done pro tips in a while. We've had some fantastic interviews, so we've been missing these. And I'm getting some feedback from folks. So we're going to throw out some pro tips. And Michael Morrow, you're on the spot because you're the one that's been out shooting the most.
Mine is kind of a lame one, and it harkens back to our last episode. But I just am more and more convinced every day that my pro tip is go buy an R5. Go buy a Canon R5. You'll be happy. This thing is like money. I tell you what, every day I learn something new. We just did a podcast earlier with for our Nampa thing, which I don't know if we've even put it out there, but we're doing this another little podcast series, and we recorded the first one. It's going to go on this network, so you're going to hear it on the Wild and Exposed. So it's yet to come, probably 1st of October. But we had a previous guest on that particular podcast, Chaz, and he's a Canon Explorer of Light. So we got into a little conversation about the R5s. And he actually said something during the podcast that made me think, but my point to all that is I'm learning every day something new and just something cool that this camera will do, right? One of the coolest things that I've had happen with the new camera is, well, not had happen, but it just does it. It just works this way. In the old days, if you switch between stills and video, unless you set up all your custom functions, if you went from stills that you might be shooting at 1/250th of a second at 5.6 ISO 800, you switch to video, you're at the same settings, right? So then you got to go in and change your settings to, if you're trying to shoot cinematically, you're going to set it so that you are at twice the frame rate for your shutter speed. So it took time. It's just like going back to the old no tripod days. Well, this camera, you just switch between the modes and it holds whatever settings you had for the last session that you were in that particular, whether you were shooting video or stills. So just little things like that just are speeding up the process. It just sells me more and more every day on this little camera. I still haven't put it through its paces as far as weather and cold and things like that, but everything that I've had it going through so far has been pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
I want to comment on that because we got some negative feedback on our last podcast. And it was primarily because we didn't do comparisons to the Sony. Now, first of all, the Sony A7S III is not out yet. We can't get that in our hands. Secondly, the biggest advantage for a wildlife photographer with the Canon currently is still lens selection, because you can use the EF mount glass, which is phenomenal glass, and you can use the RF mount glass. So you have some options. Sony still has, with their long zoom, it's a great lens, very sharp lens, but again, at the long end, it's f6.3. So that's what we're talking about. You know, with the Canon 200 to 400, you still have the ability to shoot at f4. I am not, and we are not at all knocking the Sony system. We have a lot of friends that use it very successfully. This just opens up some options and allows for a little bit more selection. So,
well, and I have the Sony and I have the Canon, so I have them both, and I could do a comparison side by side, you know.
Can't do a comparison to the A7S III yet because nobody's got it in their hands.
No, but I think that'd be hard to compare too, right? Because I wouldn't
not a
dream of shooting that camera for stills. I would shoot it for video, and I think it's going to be pretty awesome.
Video camera. Sony said it was a video camera.
Right.
And so it is the Mac Daddy, but for a hybrid system, and I'm not knocking any of the other Sony cameras either. The A9 is phenomenal. A7S 3, 4, A7 3, all great cameras. This just gives you more flexibility in shooting, and I think a little bit more cinematic potential on the video as well.
Well, I think it gives you more if you're a Canon shooter, if you have that glass.
Exactly.
That's the big thing, because not very many people that are going to switch completely from a Nikon or from a Sony are even going to have that glass. So stay with what you got. I mean, if you got a 100 to 400 Sony or a 200 to 600 and you like it, stay with it. Yeah. If you're wanting to experiment or you have a lineup of Canon glass, my pro tip is buy the R5. You won't regret it.
Yeah, and you guys cost me, actually not you guys, you, Mike, to pick up 200 to 400 at a really good price, because that individual, who shall remain nameless, because I still like him, even though he decided he's going to hang on to it. He has decided that he's going to look at the R5 before he gets rid of that glass.
Smart person, whoever
Michael
that is.
Morrow. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Mentioned that in the last pod. We kind of mentioned that in the last one, didn't we? I think that the prices are going to start to increase and people are going to stop trying to sell them.
And that happened.
Jumped on it sooner.
I was looking on Lens Authority today, and they have gone up $1,000.
Yeah, I bet it's
release
keeps
of that
going
camera.
up.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And something for our audience. There are 4 of us here, and we have colleagues in the field that all shoot different types of equipment. We can simply share what we have and the experiences that we have. And thankfully, Michael was one of the first to get his hands on an R5, is in Alaska, in the field, and able to put it to use. So it was with enthusiasm that we were able, or Michael was able, to do this review and share it. It was not to shelve any other camera or company.
Absolutely.
There's no sponsorship. We all have, for the most part, we have different brands and are successful with different brands. And this is an exciting piece of equipment and technology that's come out this month that we're able to give some insight on, because Michael had his hands on one right out of the gate. And that was why we were.
And was in a great spot to test it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and that being said, I have the Sony and I don't plan on selling it. We use it for a lot of the commercial work, and a lot of the guys that I hire actually have the Sony. I just feel like it's better to have consistent cameras across the board there. So I'm not dissing that system at all. I just had the Canon glass, got a hold of the camera, and I feel like it works. And if you're on the fence, my pro tip is buy it. But I really don't care what camera I have. I think you can make, and that came up in the earlier podcast today too, it's not about the camera. Ultimately, I mean, there's things that make it easier, but it's all about just take the dang picture.
Well, there's so many elements, right, to the whole experience, and so much of this technology is changing overnight. It's just taking the opportunities to create outstanding images and putting it in more people's hands. It's easier now than ever to create outstanding work, and which is great for everybody. But there are many cameras that do it. But it's just exciting to see, the R5 mirrorless camera, what it brings to the table. It brings so much in that small little piece of equipment. And honestly, I felt the excitement, and I still may end up putting my hands on one. I'm waiting to hear from a couple of friends' reviews on the 1 to 500, but I have held back because I'm not traveling quite as much this fall. I will be shooting a lot, but not as much as normal. And I'm hearing rumors about another camera company that I've been with for a long time, with stuff coming out next year. And some of those are pretty tantalizing from what I'm hearing in the rumors. So I don't need it today. It'd be nice to have the technology that the R5 brings to the table in my hands today for upcoming photo shoots. But Nikon's got some stuff brewing from what I hear. And so I'm on the fence. I look forward to seeing the cameras firsthand with some friends out west soon, and see what more up closer to the cameras and what they're getting, and get more feedback that way too. But like you said, Michael, I mean, I don't have any Canon lenses, so I'd simply be buying one or two to go with this camera. And I don't want to switch all over. But for most of what we do, I mean, it's not ideal to have different brands because of different menu systems and setups, but you can have one of each. Anyway, I'm rambling on. I'm on the fence at the moment, but hopefully the rumors I'm hearing are true about another company, but it will take some time to verify that.
Did I say the downside to the R5? Did we talk about downsides on that last podcast? I can't remember.
I don't know, but I don't.
You started with, I ordered another one, so I don't think we mentioned too many downsides, except for the menu system.
Well, and I don't even mind the menu system.
Tracking, but that was something I was going to mention on my Nikon on the fence pro tip for today. But other than that, I don't remember you saying anything as far as a downside.
So here's the downside that I figured out. It can be fixed with money, but who has tons of expendable income? I'm running the fastest Mac laptop as of whatever this year, right? The beginning of this year. So they may have a faster one out now. I'm not sure, but it was the fastest you could get in January. I cannot play the 4K footage. That's just a kind of a bummer. You just can't.
Not even the 4K.
No. The 4K HQ, I can't. I haven't shot in 4K, regular 4K at all. I just shoot everything in 4K HQ, and my computer just won't. You import the clips into Premiere, and then try to play it. It'll play like the first 3 or 4 seconds, and then it just stops. So the workaround is you just go in and create proxies. You edit with your proxies, and a proxy, if you don't know what that is, it just makes a smaller file. So then you got more time and more hard drive space because you got your original files, and then you got to make a different file that's smaller that you can edit with, and then you can take that timeline and then just replace it. When you get your final video, you can replace it with all the high quality footage and export it. Once you export it, it's fine, but it's going to compress it, for a YouTube or for a Vimeo or for whatever you're going to do. But this particular computer won't do it. I know you could go out and buy the new iMac.
Simple process, though.
It's not hard. Yeah, I actually haven't done it. I've done it before, but I'm going to need to go watch a YouTube video to figure out how to create the proxies. But the downside is I'm going to have to buy more hard drive space, right? Normally I can get through a 2, 3, 4 month time in Alaska with shooting with one 8 terabyte drive is my main drive and just backups. So I don't think I could do it if I start making proxies. I don't know. I don't know. I guess it depends on how big these proxies are and how much you shoot too, right?
That is an issue.
But so it's that cost thing, right? You cannot view. Now I think that'll change the next couple of years. Computers get cheaper. Everybody's upgrading. Well, most people upgrade computers. So, I mean, it's just going to naturally. And I've dealt with this problem the whole time. Red, you can't do the same. I can't watch it with red. I can watch it at 1/16th resolution, but that's just the way it goes. But that's the only downside I've found so far that just is kind of frustrating. Because it'd be cool. I mean, when you're editing a project, it's just super cool to see the actual footage and how sharp it is. And, make sure you're telling that right story based off the footage that you have rather than looking at a really pixelated low-res version and saying, is that totally sharp? I don't know. That kind of thing. But you can solve it with the proxies.
Or a $30,000 computer.
Well, I think you could probably do it for 10. If you bought the new iMac and then loaded it up, and I'm totally guessing there, I don't know how much they cost. I would assume 10 by the time you put the better graphics card in it, get the solid-state drives, get the most RAM that you can put in it, and then the iMac itself, I would assume. Or you could go buy the hot rod, which, Apple, last year they came out with that super fast
but what, that's $50,000, right?
Oh, yeah, I don't even know.
You share that with 50 of your closest friends.
Right.
Yeah, I don't even know how much those were. I think you could get one for 16 or 17,000.
All right, back to Earth.
Yeah, back to reality.
Jason, you have a pro tip?
So this last weekend, and I'll save what I was doing. I was out shooting this last weekend, and I had my Sony. And on the last episode, I talked about potentially looking at the R5 and selling my Sony for some of the issues that I found with the Sony, just personal things. It's interesting. So I kind of made the decision. Well, not kind of. I made the decision to go ahead and get that R5 in the 100 to 500 and give it a shot. And I did sell my Sony and my 2 to 600. But as I got home from that trip, just to kind of touch on how similar these systems are and how good they all are, I'm looking at my images, and the kid shows up that's buying my camera, and I was actually very pleased with most of the images I was getting from my camera or from my shoot, and I was having a really, really hard time making that actual decision to sell him that Sony camera. It was actually really hard to let go of it. So we'll see what happens. Who knows? But so right now, I've sold my Sony, and I'm looking to get an R5 in my hands with that 100 to 500. So we'll see how that goes. As far as my own personal pro tip, there's times when you're in the field and you're wanting to get low on the ground. And a lot of times you're either laying on the ground on your stomach, or you're sitting on the ground, or you're kneeling down. And a lot of times for me, because I'm old, laying on my stomach starts to hurt my back after a while. Kneeling down, my knees just aren't made for kneeling. I've proven that time and time again. If I kneel down for about 5 minutes, I can't get up. And sitting down can be very uncomfortable on your back. So I've come up with a solution when you don't have to be mobile. So for example, if you're in a blind or you're shooting grouse or something like that, they actually make turkey chairs, and they're very similar. They call it a beach chair, turkey chair, whatever you want to call it. But they're a very comfortable chair that tilts back just a touch, and they're made for beach going and turkey hunting and things of that nature. And you can set that thing right on the ground, and it gives you a really good low perspective, and it makes it very comfortable. I've used one of those for shooting grouse and some different things, and shooting the owls, the burrowing owls, and super, super comfortable, super easy. They're about $20 a piece, and I sat there for 2 or 3 hours at a time and never had a single problem. So very comfortable. So that's my pro tip. Something else that you can maybe pick up and add to your photography gear bag for certain types of shoots. It doesnn't come in handy if you have to be mobile, but if you're going to just be sitting there, it's a great solution.
I'm a huge proponent of that. Anytime I know where I'm going to be in one place, I always take a chair of some sort, no matter what. If you want to get low, a regular, camp chair doesn't work very good, but it just makes you sit longer, right? It just gives you that much more opportunity to just wait it out and wait for that, whatever you're waiting for.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you don't want to be moving, if your subject is sensitive to movement and that, if the longer you can stay comfortable and stay still, the better off you're going to be too. So
it works really good too if you put a ghillie suit on, right, Mark?
Yeah, and I was going to say, it's too bad it's today's story on Instagram, but, Michael Morrow was showing us how you can be really comfortable in the field as well. You just lay down on some tundra, on some moss. Yeah. I'll put that up again the day this podcast comes out, if I remember, just so people can visit that.
That is one of the nice things about Alaska. And it's just about anywhere you lay down. It's nice, cushy tundra. It's pretty easy to catch a little nap.
Meditate, yes. And bring on the Zen.
Yes.
But ghillie suits are fun for sure.
And those turkey chairs, Jason, they're great to have. But when somebody else is using it and then you have to kneel, it doesn't do you any good at all. So, yeah, I can relate on both. I love the turkey chairs, but when you let the Canadian steal it when he's down as a guest, photographing in your area.
So harsh.
And he's taking a nap and you're switching knees that you have to kneel on every 15 seconds.
I remember you handing it to me saying, "Here, try this." I don't remember sneaking into your garage and putting
That's because we were trying to keep you awake from the day before when you were sleeping in the snow.
Oh, it was so comfortable, though. And yeah, that fresh snow. It was so cold. And I had my new down mittens. Those are fantastic. I had a good pair of down mittens that fold up and stick in your pockets. There's some new ones out that the ones I have are made by Kuiu, and seriously, lifesavers. I've never had mittens where my hands, all of you filmed it. I could spin this into the pro tip for today. All of you who have filmed out in winter at some point will get freezing fingertips, whether you use those mitts with the fingers exposed, whether your hands are exposed, you're touching metal here and there, or just the wind chill. I've never had something where I put my hands in that's not heated somehow and warmed them up within a minute. That being said, Chaz earlier today, his gloves that are out there now sound like they are pretty sweet. And I don't have a pair of those to have tested, but I know that I have friends that do.
They're awesome. Yep.
I have a pair. They work very well.
And
They're a really good product.
They've been out for years, actually, but they are continuing to improve and make it friendlier for the photographer. And they heat you right back up, too. I mean, I was to the point where I thought probably on the borderline frostbite and just threw my fingers back in, zipped it up, and I was warm again. And, within a minute or two, filming sheep last winter.
Where do people find them? What's his website again?
Heat 3 Systems, or Heat Systems, is the
I'll put a
website.
link in the show notes. He told us that.
Because
he said they totally revamped that website too. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a pair, and they are amazing.
There's a
How am I the
Canadian.
only
We'll
one?
put the Canadian link and
There's a Canadian link, and I don't have a pair.
U.S. link.
I bet you could call Chaz up and get
$189.
$189.
You can get a pair.
This is a test to see if Charles Glatzer listens to our podcast on a weekly basis. If so, just saying, Chaz. Potential ambassador. Okay.
That was a good pro tip, though.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a half a pro tip. I have another one that is something that one of our listeners brought up and emailed about. Quite a few this week, and there's some at some point I would like to get into those emails a little bit more, but was just wanting to touch base and point out, and on the R5, and again, I don't have an R5 right now, but after the last podcast where Michael was talking about the difficulty that it had finding and tracking an animal's eye when there's not a lot of contrast, was just to make sure that when you go in the menu system that it has an animal eye setting and a human eye setting. Now, Michael and I talked earlier, and he did confirm that it was on the animal eye setting, but I bring it up just for you, those of you who may photograph people or video people and animals, to be aware of that difference and to make sure you have it on the right setting when you are using it. I have another friend. So many people have picked up this R5. Lots haven't. I'm not just saying that, but another guy I know picked one up. Actually, no, he was shooting the R6, and he had that on Facebook and Instagram of waterfowl, and he was saying he was super impressed with the tracking on the waterfowl that he was photographing. So just be aware in the menu system there is a difference between photographing people and animals for the eye tracking setup.
Good one. You got to remember the other way too, because if you're got it on animal setting and you go photograph people, you want to switch it back.
Well, you don't want the people you're photographing, when you look at the image and show it to them, and they look like a bear or a zebra or a giraffe, right?
I guess it depends on the person you're photographing, but we'll leave it at that.
And if there's a ghillie suit involved.
All right, so I've just got a quick one, and since I have been stuck where these guys have been out, I've been stuck. I've done a lot of re-editing. Gone through some images that I've edited in the past, and you're, as time goes by, your editing skills, your tastes, your kind of, what would you call it? Your style changes a little bit. And so I've gone back through several images, actually several thousand images, and done some re-edits on those. And I would say that I've come up with a few things, and I think it would probably make a good YouTube video just to do, my top 5 tools in Lightroom for editing wildlife. But I want to challenge you guys as you're editing to try out some brushes, utilize the brushes, and utilize the luminosity masking capabilities or color masking capabilities in Lightroom. It's the more and more they grow and the more advantages, they add to Lightroom. You still cannot work in layers. So there's still, like Mark primarily edits in Photoshop, and there's still times where you have to go into Photoshop. But they've added more and more tools into Lightroom that have made it kind of a one-stop shop. And, just enhanced what's already there. So I would say, use those brushes, find just these little subtle nuances. You've got everything lit well on this elk except maybe a cheek. So just go in, add a little brush to the cheek of this elk, and then just add a little bit of light to it. You don't want light added to the entire image, but that one spot is going to make a big difference in your finished product. So that's just one potential area where that could be utilized. But the luminosity and color masking capabilities have been a game changer with that software. So if you are somebody that likes to go in and, I don't edit every image heavily. I don't edit many images heavily, but where I have found I can get through an image pretty fast with the tools that are in Lightroom right now. And I think that probably is a good, would make for a good YouTube video, just top 5 tools for editing editing wildlife in Lightroom. So we'll make that happen.
Can I hire you to do my images?
You don't do anything to your image. You don't have to do anything to your images.
They're all perfect.
I know.
Light is always perfect. Man, I have not even touched that stuff. I want to. I just am scared to delve into it because I know it's going to take some time. Yeah, I guess that's a good winter thing, right?
It is a good winter project. Yep, for sure.
The Camera Raw in Photoshop has really expanded in the past year or two. A lot more versatility that I find can work images through the system faster too.
Does that mean it's faster, the Camera Raw thing?
I think just having more sliders and more tools that are specific rather than more broad application helps speed it up. Yeah. Because images, a certain image might only need 2 or 3 of the sliders adjusted. So I appreciate that. What's the right word? Well, it's more specific, but it's more detailed as far as what you can do to an image with the more tools that are on there.
Is that hard to learn because you've, like, for me,
no, it's similar
every time
function
they
to Lightroom,
introduce
sliders.
a new, is it in Photoshop?
Camera Raw, yes.
Oh, Camera Raw. So that's different than Photoshop.
Essentially what Camera Raw does is it pulls it up in Photoshop, and it looks a lot like the sliders that you have in Lightroom, so you can do all your pre-adjustments before it brings it into Photoshop.
And that's non-destructive. Like, you always maintain the raw. It's not like doing anything. It's just showing you what those things have done before you bring it into Photoshop.
Yeah, my workflow is I'll open the raw in Camera Raw, it goes into Photoshop, and then it's exported as a 16-bit TIFF.
So Mark, on when you prepare an image, start to finish, let's just say you have one image, you're going to take it through your process, and I just want you to average it out because some take long, some take short, whatever. Start to finish for your process, what would you say the average amount of time per image is?
5 minutes. Once it's on my desktop, yes. Once it's in, so I access through Bridge. Once I see it in Bridge to done, my guess would be 5 minutes an image. Sometimes less. It's such a hard thing to guess. You think I do this so often. There are some that I might spend 10 minutes on.
But then there's some that you spend no time on, right?
They're all a few minutes. They all take, I do them individually. So I don't batch as much as that's old school. I'm old school by not batching.
No wonder it takes you 6 months to edit.
I take a lot of pictures. Digital's not helping with that. I take that many more now. Well, it's so rare not to get a shot now. But I feel I'm so much looser in as far as not always composing as well as I would have historically on a tripod. I like the fluidity of handheld, but my horizon's not always right because of that. That's another thing in post that can be quickly fixed. So no stress, especially on a 45 megapixel sensor. My horizon's off. That's no big deal.
Yep.
But all of that takes time in the images. And with raw images, they are not sexy when they're shot. They all need some kind of doctoring before they go out the door, just whether it's color or contrast, all the brightness. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about RAW is all that latitude where, we know what we saw. and we can recreate that in post, but that does take that time and patience.
I think we need to do what Ron says. I think somehow, some way, we need to do some sort of a podcast, video podcast, where we show, because we attempted that once before with Jason and Ron. We were actually going to critique some images, and I thought I did a lot. And I'll say my images, if I am not done in 30 seconds, I'm not messing with it. So
I didn't hear what your numbers were.
Well, mine's 30. Jason's right on par with you. And I said, well, all you guys are about the same. But after watching Jason and Ron, and I've never sat down and watched them before until we did this podcast, the tools they use and what they achieve, I've never watched you do it, Mark, so I can't speak to it. But I'm like, oh, man, I didn't even know you could. I mean, I know you can do that, but I've never seen the results from doing that. And after seeing them do it, I'm like, holy moly. I mean, there's probably tons of images that I have that I can make look pretty cool. I just have never tried it. And I really think that podcast would, or that sort of a,
Sure.
I'm sure there's a ton of them out there already, but for wildlife, I don't know if there's that many. So it would be good to do it.
Well, there are tools that we use that other genres might not too. I mean,
right. Well, and then it's interesting to see what you all would focus on too. What's the main focus of this image and why? Those kinds of things would just be super interesting, just from a perspective of you guys that are actually using the tools.
You have heard my last 2 weeks, so I'm all caught up. Except I've been photographing a bunch of people, which I don't like to do, but I am finding while I'm stuck at home, it pays better than wildlife. So I've done a lot of that here recently, and that may be good for in the near future. We'll just leave it right there.
Well, I don't know. You had a comment on a text chain that we were running earlier, and you said you were doing some southern Wyoming elk. And Jason said, was that pronghorn?
It was not pronghorn. It was actually wapiti.
Oh.
But it was way south Wyoming. I mean, further south than I've ever been in Wyoming before.
Wow.
So pretty much Colorado.
Toward in that general direction, yeah.
But not over the border. I understand.
No, because then you would get COVID.
Correct.
So anyway, I did have a unique encounter, and most hummingbird shots that I've seen that turn out just pristine are typically shot at a feeder with a fake limb attached to the feeder, so it looks like natural material or natural flower. Perfect light. This bird buzzed me. I mean, came right by my left ear and shot right down to these Russian thistles. And as it got to the thistles, it just hovered. And I was like, I was set up for this bull was starting to get cows up out of bed. And so I was set up for that. I was at about 1,000th of a second and about 400 ISO at f5.6. I left the aperture alone, but I busted it up to 2,500th of a second. And then I bumped my ISO to 800. And at one point, I think I shot 1,600 ISO to get it to the 2,500th of a second. But I got the best hummingbird shots I've ever gotten. This thing was hovering, and I just waited because it was going from flower to flower. And I waited until I had one that was kind of facing perpendicular to me so that the bird would be, exactly perpendicular. And as soon as it got to that flower, I busted off about 40 images, and I got 3 or 4, as you know, if you photograph hummingbirds. And the background was, the thistle was far enough away from the grass that was behind it that it just gave this perfect tan bokeh. And those images turned out really sweet. So I was happy with that.
Didn't you put one of those on Instagram?
I did. Yeah, I threw one up just because it had never happened before. So I thought I would throw one up there. But I did get some great elk images that I was happy with, but probably the shot of the trip for me was that hummingbird, just because I've never had that kind of success without any enticement whatsoever. That thing just buzzed the tower and boom, just posed right there in front of me, hovering. So it was pretty neat.
We'll put that picture in the show notes, but you can check Ron's Instagram if you want to see it right away.
I'm going to put it on the Wild and Exposed Instagram too.
Because he was guilt tripped.
No, because it's fantastic. And now there's a story behind it that makes it even more exciting. I love it.
Yeah, it was a fun shoot.
So yeah, check it out on Wild and Exposed or Ron's Instagram, or both, because there are different images on them. It's worth the visit.
So I want to hear Jason's story, because every year I miss the elk rut, and I did it for so many years, and now he's been down messing around with them, and actually had some interesting weather, right? So
the ride home alone will take a while, but it's funny that Ron brought up the hummingbirds. I actually had an opportunity to shoot some hummingbirds here, and it was literally the night before I left to go to Colorado to chase some elk around. And very similar situation, shooting thistle and shooting some purple flowers and stuff. And it's the first time I'd shot hummingbirds naturally with natural flowers and stuff instead of, hummingbird feeders and stuff. So that was really fun. I've done it before with feeders, but a challenging thing to shoot if you've never shot hummingbirds before. And I had this image in my mind from a friend of mine, Julie Argyle. She shot this hummingbird photo where there's a lot of times when hummingbirds are feeding, and those that have shot them will know this, that they kind of they fight over who gets to feed on what flower sometimes. I'm sure it's just a posturing thing, it's a dominance thing, but the one hummingbird will come in and bump the other one away, and so there's this split second of this interaction between the hummingbirds. And she got this amazing photo where the one hummingbird is upside down, the other hummingbird's on top above it, and they're facing each other with their wings just in a really neat position. But to understand what it takes to get that shot is just incredible, because first of all, you're more than likely shooting in a pretty low aperture, and you've got to have both those birds to get them perfectly sharp in the exact same focal plane or very close. And especially like Ron was alluding to, getting your shutter speeds up where you need the action. So anyways, I had this idea. I was going to go out and recreate that image, and I failed miserably. But she might have that on her page if you want to go check her Instagram out, at Julie Argyle. But then I left and went to Colorado, and I spent the weekend with my wife and my son over there, chasing some elk around, and had a great few days. The rut is definitely going, and it was really exciting to get out and get spend some time with some elk. And as I alluded to earlier, I had both my Nikon and my Sony, and I was pretty happy with the images I got from both of those setups. But the last day I was there, before I left, a very big storm hit, and it basically hit from Wyoming clear into. Did it hit into Denver too? I think it did. I think it went clear down into basically all the way along the Denver, the front range there, all up into Wyoming and all across Wyoming actually. There was snow that I fought on the way home for quite a ways, but it made for some really good shooting conditions on Tuesday morning. And I had to stick around and try to shoot that, obviously. So I was actually having a hard time driving away from that situation, because I knew that the rest of that day and this morning was just going to be incredible. And that absolutely turned out to be, as I have a couple of friends that were still over there shooting those situations. But as I headed home, everything looked good. And I got up to Laramie, and that's when the closure started to happen. So I was in my Subaru Outback, and we are not sponsored by Subaru, but here's a plug for the Outback. I'm telling you what, man, I put that thing through the ringer. I had that thing. We went over some passes, and because I-80 was closed, I just was going to find my way home, and I followed the GPS, and it took me in places I've never been, and I probably never go again. I don't even know if I could find these places again, but I was at one point on about 100-mile stretch of dirt road that was going back and forth over the border between Wyoming and Colorado, and there was nothing out there but oil rigs and just flat sagebrush, prairie. And there was about a foot of snow on the road, and it was kind of slushy, muddy, and I thought I was going to get stuck, and there's no cell reception at all. So about halfway into that, I was thinking, what am I doing? I'm going to have to lay this back seat down and actually sleep in my Subaru for the first time. But fortunately, it performed great. That all-wheel drive and the clearance got me through, and my car was a lot dirtier at the end of it. It was caked with mud. And it was funny, right before I left, my son, it was my birthday over the weekend, and my son said, "Hey, Dad, your car's pretty dirty." This was before all this went down. And I said, "Yeah, I know, man." He said, "Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to wash your car for your birthday." So when I got home, he looked at it. He's like, "Oh my gosh, what did you do?" I said, "Well, you said you'd wash it for my birthday, bud." So anyway, he actually did. He actually took it and went tonight and washed it for me. So he's a good kid. But yeah, anyways, I made it home safe. I got home about 4:00 in the morning. And
what time did you leave?
Some of us, I left there at 11 o'clock. So what normally takes me 7 hours to get home took me about 15 or 16 hours to get home. It was a rough, long afternoon, and then what's crazy is I finally got through all that, and I got back up to I-80 at Rock Springs, and it was still closed. So I had to do more back roads, and got to Evanston, and it was still closed. So I had to basically camp out in Evanston for a bit until they opened it back up, and that's when I got home. But anyways, so it was an adventurous Labor Day weekend for me.
Was it that bad? So. Were the roads iced up, or was it just there was just so much snow falling?
It's the exact reason that I love and hate the first snowfall of the year, because you get the images, but then when you're traveling, everybody over the course of the summer and spring has forgotten how to drive in the snow. And so typically it's the accidents that close everything down, because they get the plows out, but the accidents piling up and people sliding off and those kind of things had things shut down all across the state, everywhere, not just on the south where Jason was.
Yeah. Yeah, and people don't realize is I-80 is terrible for winter storms, and they close it all the time because that wind is just constantly blowing. So what happens is the plows will get going, and they'll try to stay ahead of it, but the wind's blowing so much that the storms are good, it just drifts more snow onto the road and just continues to cause really, really bad conditions. So there was some of that going on too. I mean, I was hitting areas after even Evanston where there was some slick areas and slick spots where snow had been drifting and hitting on the road. And then as it cooled down in the evening, it froze some more. So, but what was really interesting is as I hit the Utah border, it's like the snowstorm just hit Wyoming. It didn't really hit Utah, but Utah got a really bad windstorm. It must have just been one on the edge of the storm system or something. And we got some really high winds. And here around my area, my hometown, there's a lot of power outages, a lot of trees coming down on vehicles and houses and cars, and it's a pretty big mess. A lot of lights, city lights and stuff out in downtown Salt Lake and Ogden area and stuff like that. So, been kind of an eventful couple of days for sure.
So, tell us about what it was like shooting the elk in Rocky Mountain National Park, because I heard all these horror stories about, they're going to close this down, or they're going to shut this off, or we're not going to let people in, or what was it like? Were you able to get into the park?
I think all the photographers have the same opinion about it. And I think most of us feel like there's not good sound science behind their decision. It's more an issue of not wanting to deal with people.
Here's my opinion on it. Looking at it from, several years, and we've all seen the parks for a lifetime. Hang on, I'm going to move my mic. Looking at it from several years, the parks have gotten crazy busy. And in the same way that if you watch the news, you see that people are less and less respectful of other people's privacy, other people's boundaries. The same exists in the park. I honestly think that Yellowstone is probably about 2 seasons away from being Denali, and the only way you can get in there is on a bus. The people management, now this year was the anomaly, of course, because a lot of folks were kept out of there, but the people management is so intensive that it is a true issue. Now, when I look at Rocky, I haven't necessarily seen the same thing, because the vast majority of folks stay on the outside of those meadows in their camp chairs and they just want to sit and watch. And they're videoing with their cell phones and they're getting great audio because there's bulls bugling everywhere, and just make kind of a family time out of it. I've honestly not seen or experienced a lot of photographers pressuring animals that cause them to move off those meadows. Those elk are going to stay there. They're going to do what they want to do. People back off when they get close. And I guess that's where I do agree. I mean, I know that the Park Service has issues with people management, and I think that's they say, don't harm the tundra or don't pressure the animals or respect this, respect that. But I don't think those are, like you said, scientifically proven issues, because those elk are used to being around people. And it doesn't bother them at all that people are around. They go on doing what they're doing. They feed, they lay down and sleep. If an animal felt pressured, they wouldn't do either one of those things. They'd be gone. So in that respect, I think that they are blaming a group of people who's not necessarily responsible for an issue. And I question those methods, but I do see that there are issues in the park that weren't there even 5 years ago, in some instances.
I'll add to that real quick. So I was there last year and I did see some things happen where, people, the average person that has a cell phone or an iPad or whatever, they did start to enter the meadows more and more. Usually you would just see, photographers with large lenses and that out in the meadow. But last year I started to see a trend of more and more folks with cell phones and iPads, wandering out into the meadow too. And there was a couple of days where I did see a pretty large line of tourists with cell phones and iPads out there trying to get images and videos and stuff with their cell phones. And I think that might be part of what's driving this, is just the amount of people that are starting to enter the meadow. The thing that's hard is for folks like us. I mean, we live for that experience. And when you have a situation where the elk are in the meadow, that time between 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock is prime time. That is the best light. It's the perfect situation. And for most of us, I mean, closing the meadow down at 10 o'clock, it's almost like they're trying to do us a little bit of a favor by not saying it's all day. But from a photographer's standpoint, it might as well be all day. Because by 10 o'clock, most of the time, the elk are done doing their thing. They're going to be bedded down. If they're in the meadow still, they're going to be laying there not doing much. And the light's going to be terrible. So unless you have weather or something like that, there's still some opportunity this year to maybe get some of that. But it does dramatically change the dynamic of shooting the elk there in the park. And, there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities. There's going to be some situations that you could have got in the past that you just won't be able to get anymore. And what I'm afraid of is that now the situation, what's hard for me, and this is just my perspective, so please don't write in and get too mad at me. This is just my perspective. But I really feel like all we see is a continuing situation where they take away more and more freedoms. They take away more stuff. We never get things added. We just get things taken away. And it's hard because I feel like this is our park. It's there for us to enjoy, and we need to do it respectfully. And I feel like the folks that were doing these things, for the most part, were very respectful, and they were obeying the rules and keeping the distance and doing those things. So I get there's a balancing act there, and it's really difficult. I understand that, but it's just hard for me to give up that 3 hours of perfect prime time to shoot those elk. And maybe the solution is the meadows are closed, and you got to have a photographer's permit to be in the meadow, because then they can, you go on some kind of a draw system. They only allow 10 or 20 photographers a day to have the permit, and you just have to put in and get your permit, just like a lot of the, like Denali does or some of these other places. It would make more money for the park. You would know exactly who's in the meadow. And if there's a limited number of folks in the meadow that have those permits, then maybe that would work. And only the people who are going to put in for a permit like that are the people that are serious about wanting to get those images and have those opportunities. So I don't know. I had a lot of time to think about it over the weekend, and those are some of the kind of the thoughts that have come to my mind. But
what? Yeah, I don't think you've actually said what happened there, so maybe you can just line it out, because I don't even know what they did. What are the restrictions that they put in place?
It used to be
Yes.
7 to 7.
What
Correct.
what
Or
used
7
to
to
be?
It was 5 in the evening until
7 to
7 in the
5.
morning. The
Yeah.
meadows were closed, so the elk could have, could be free to do whatever they want. The funny thing is, a lot of times the elk don't come in the meadow at that time. They're on the edges and they're out there by the people. So that's where it gets hard to the new change is now they've closed the meadows till 10 o'clock. So there's been some, there's been some smart elk things going on, so anglers are still allowed at 7, but if you're out there for any other reason, you're not allowed to be. It doesn't say you have to be fishing. So there's a few of us that have thought it might be kind of funny to strap a fly rod to the back of us and go out and take photos. Obviously, we understand the intent's the real issue there, and that's just going to create more issues. So, but yeah, the way it reads is that you're allowed to be in the meadow from 7 to 5 if you are an angler. You're not allowed to be in the meadow between 10 and 5, you're not allowed to be in the meadow until 10 o'clock if you're anybody else. So a lot of people will walk into the meadow, they'll walk down to the water. There's a creek that runs through the meadow there in Moraine. And people fish it. People get in the creek and swim, not swim because it's not deep enough to swim, but play around in the water. And people go through walks through the meadow, just all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of reasons that people might want to be in the meadow. But that's what's happened this year. That's the change. That's the big thing that's really got a lot of folks down about the situation with the elk rut in Rocky Mountain.
And the comment was that if that doesn't resolve the pressure on the elk, that they would just close it completely. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably what's coming. But it's
I would imagine that's coming. I would agree with you, Ron.
I think for us, for professional photographers, it's kind of like, the ease of people going out and taking good images. I mean, people are taking great images because the accessibility of good equipment has become more prevalent. There's a lot more people that have good equipment and are getting good shots. So if you want to be or maintain as a professional, we're going to have to find new spots. We're going to have to work harder. And we're going to have to work a lot harder to make sure that our images stand out. It'd be a lot more creative because there's thousands of the same image out there in some of these places. So I think finding places where we can isolate ourselves, or maybe, finding hot spots that other people don't have access to, I think that's probably going to be the ticket. And quite honestly, for me, and I know, Mike, you at least feel this way as well, I'm not a big fan of standing there with 150 other people and, photographing those bears in the spring in Grand Teton. The 399 had 4 cubs this year, which was an anomaly. It's something we may not see again. But there were 400 to 500 people there all the time, and I felt bad for her. I felt bad for those cubs, but that was just life in Grand Teton National Park. And they actually did a really good job of managing people. I thought at that point in time, I thought they were just going to shut it down, but I thought that they did some good things. And so I'll give them props there. But I think we're probably, because people have just gotten more bold, they're not educated on animal behavior. They're not educated on what is and isn't, pressure to an animal. And so they just run out there with the iPhone or the iPad or whatever and try to get these selfies or video on animals, and they want to get as close as they possibly can. And it does cause some issues for them. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think we're just going to have to bite the bullet and work a little bit harder and find some different spots. Mark, you were nodding your head there.
Which way?
It was going up and down when I saw it.
It's, I've heard so many wonderful things and seen so many outstanding images from Yellowstone and Grand Tetons, and the landscape, the wildlife, the diversity, phenomenal. Personally, I've not been there, and this isn't to rock anybody's boat, but I have no plan to go because there's just too many people. There's as a photographer, as somebody who sells their work in wildlife photography, there's no harm in having an image here or there that lots of other people might have, but it can't be the norm. It's got to be the anomaly. And I find, and this is not an antisocial thing whatsoever, I love hanging out with other photographers and hearing stories and hearing about adventures anytime, but I don't want to be in a row like you suggested of multiple lenses taking the same image. There's no point to that in what I do. And it can still be a magical experience. I'm not knocking that either, but in those group situations. But it's so hard with human population on this planet. What's going on? There's just so many people in parks. I can't speak to Colorado parks, but I know in Canada, budgets have been hammered and they just don't have the personnel to be out there to properly manage the amount of tourism that's going on nowadays in the popular destinations. So there's that. I can envision that boardroom difficulty. How do we deal with this? Because it's happening. It's unfortunate, and I'm not saying it's the right answer. The right answer is to fund the parks. They're making buckets of money from all these international tourists. Buckets of money. Fund the parks with proper staffing to manage this as well as possible. They can't cover all the bases. That is impossible. The number of people, wildlife that's near a road or crossing a road is choosing to do so in these places. They're typically habituated. They're used to seeing people. They're not stressed by seeing people. They may be stressed by a bunch of people with smartphones approaching them. That's not acceptable. And that's education. And that's where the name of the game is now with these untold numbers of people visiting these high concentration areas. So educate the people, put more money back into the system so there's enough staffing, not to necessarily fine people unless it's definitely warranted, but just to teach them why this is not the proper behavior to show. So that's where I'm coming from. But at the end of the day, I'm going the other direction anyway. Not just the experiences I've had by going to, they're not necessarily wilder places, but they're less populated by people. Because Yellowstone's wild. You go off the road and wander. Not that I've been there, but the size of it, if you go a few hundred yards, it's wilderness. I would just choose to go where there aren't as many photographers. And it's a breath of fresh air. And it's not a competition thing. But when there are only a few people somewhere filming this, it's more intimate and does have unquestionably more market potential. And those opportunities are out there. The difference is people sometimes there's less information on how to do it. It's not as easy. It's not as accessible. But the reward for me personally is higher because of the effort put forward for those images. So I avoid those situations. And there are some magnificent animals that you're seeing and photographing in these places, but it's just it just doesn't do any good to have 100 images of that animal that 1,000 other people or even 50 other people, have images of. It's just not the right situation for the most enjoyment as a wildlife photographer enthusiast. But the other thing on another spin is if education is there and there's enough conservation initiative in these national parks, they can have such a positive effect on a big population of people if they educate them and move them in the direction to care about these natural ecosystems and the environment. If the education is there, there's better education on the ground, there's better online support for that, as well as staffing to make people understand or to help people understand what these animals are, why they're relevant for this ecosystem, and why this planet Earth is so amazing. They access so many tourists that they can move in a positive direction for what we're all so passionate about here on planet Earth. So, it's a difficult battle politically, I think, to see more money go there, but it would be great if those tourist dollars were maintained in those systems to support that education. And yeah, the wildlife photography, just like every other type of interaction in these ecosystems with more and more people getting involved. If there's a lake that allows boating, how many boats are allowed on the lake? All these things have to be considered and managed. But I get the struggle. I feel it, and it's a frustration. If you, even in Algonquin Park, which is quieter in comparison, but still I believe has 1 million people a year visit, or approximately. I'd have to Google that to be 100% sure. But you may be in a situation on a trail with an animal, and people can come along walking their dog and talking, and that's done. But that, you just move on. But if you're dropped off by a float plane in Alaska with 3 or 4 of your closest, most trusted friends to share some time with, that's not going to happen. So
That's true. That's true. Just a lot, like you said, I think it's an access thing for a lot of folks. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Not everybody can afford to get on a float plane and go to Alaska to have those experiences, So.
Well, or they do it less frequently. And it's not to say they shouldn't go to these popular parks. They should. But it's also just recognizing, especially on weekends or at favorable times of year, what is likely going to be like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say something real quick. I'm not against Rocky Mountain at all. I mean, it's an amazing place, and the park system in general, I understand. And you're right, Mark. I think they need to put more money that the park's making the funds. I mean, I can't imagine they're not just making a ton of money with the entry permits and the fees and stuff. It's just how much of that's actually getting back into the park, and I'm sure that's the issue. But they do a good job in general. I'm not trying to dog on. It's just something that we're used to having. And it just feels like in all these situations, because of the challenges, we just continue to have more and more things taken away, more and more access taken away. And, at some point, we've just got to do some things differently. And I don't have the answers. I'm just an average Joe. But I would sure hope that the folks that can make some of these decisions are taking it seriously and considering the voice of folks like us to try to do what they can to help make it a better experience for everybody. So, anyways, interesting conversation.
And Mike's just sitting back there, he's shutting up because he's been up there photographing by himself.
And there are situations where, I've seen them in different unnamed places, just because of the bureaucracy or the person in charge not necessarily want to deal with it, get shut down. I'm not naming any places, but there are other places that are managed well, and they are trying to figure out the best approach. But they're all different. Each case is different, and you're right. I mean, if it's a change that anybody doesn't feel is just, the best option is to write a letter to the people in charge and diplomatically approach them and see what can be done to create a discussion. Just in case, I mean, from my point of view, if they're not aware of these concerns, it may enlighten them somehow, may give them a different perspective that might or might not change things at the end of the day, but at least you have the opportunity to share your concerns.
One thing you said, Jason, is give permits for people to be out in the meadow. I think that's a cool idea. But then how do you educate the 400, 500 people that are surrounding that meadow, and they see you out there and they're like, well, if they're out there, why can't I be out there? Well, because you didn't stop and read the sign to understand that we applied for this permit 90 days prior, 6 months prior. We paid money for this, and we're out here to do a job. I think it's all legit, and it would be a good system if there's a way that you could educate. I mean, I don't even think you could hand out at the entrance station a pamphlet and expect people to read it. Nobody's going to read it, right? Few people will. So it's just like I don't know how you I don't know how you solve it. I mean, it's 100% population and loving our parks to death that is hurting it. It's just, I don't know how you get out. The only way to get out of it is what I used to do in Rocky was get as far away from you still want to go there because the elk population is so big, so you got better opportunities. But I would gamble, and I would just say, you know what, I may not get a picture today, but I'm going to hike in 2 or 3 miles. And it's 100% a gamble. You're not guaranteed anything. But I'd much rather have that scenario than dealing with the rigmarole. I'm so cognizant of people seeing me do what I do too. Not that I don't care. Anybody can watch what I do. I just don't want to give the wrong impression. And I don't think I do purposely, but no, but I'm not over there talking to them. I'm not over there saying, well, I did this because of this and I did this because of this. And it's the animal always comes first. You can't possibly do that.
You're
So
one of the most careful people that
well, your best
just in
bet
this
is
profession,
just to not.
but you don't know what they're looking at, right? You don't know where they're coming from.
You can't, yeah. So, and so many people are just so ready to. I watched it last night with some moose where, you just had kids that didn't know what they were doing, and they were just following this moose, this great big bull moose, 20 yards away. They have no idea. They just are having fun, but they have no clue. If I'd have known that's what I saw them walk in, and if I'd have known that's what they were going to do, I'd have said something. But how could you possibly know? And when I saw them, I was way far away with binoculars. So I don't know, man. It's just it's a tough.
Yeah, so many things about it. If you hear the bugle, I hear the bugle off in the hills, and I'll go that way.
That was a tactic for me, and actually that's where I met Ron. I would go to remote parts of the park, and I would just park and listen for bugles. And if I heard a bugle, I'd walk. And
I can envision that you two walking in the woods, nice pine trees, and one of you peeking out behind the bark, and then the other peeking out, and you guys eye and eye meeting, and it's like,
and there were hearts
kindred souls.
That's exactly how it happened, except that it was around a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
But that's a way to, just use your resources, and I don't know. There's ways to do it. It's just harder. It takes more time, and a lot of us don't have that. It just
I feel it. Hard. I feel the pain. There've been places over the years where I've filmed whitetails that have been culled. Moose places that have been culled, and it's done. It's gone. Right. It's but it was this. For that reason, biological management because of population densities. But this is a whole different thing. I gotta be careful how I word this, but with just so many people in these accessible areas, it's hard because they're so captivating, these places, and accessible and productive. But it honestly is so refreshing to find a quiet place, and when you do research, they're out there. You can even find them through social media. But there's no, they're not necessarily, until you try it, you don't know how productive they'll be. And sometimes it's a failure, but other times it's not. And they don't have to provide as much material at the end of the day as these popular places to feel more productive because it's quieter, to me. So I definitely get the pain
So here's the challenge, you guys. So some perspective from a guy that has to work a full-time job and try to chase his passion. You're absolutely right, everything you're saying. But for the average guy, they don't have the time to go and put the energy and resources into trying to find some wild bull elk that they can go photograph somewhere because they're trying to get the biggest bang for their dollar. They got a week's vacation, and they're going to go and spend that time trying to get as many elk images as they can because that's their passion, and they're not going to get any other chance to do that. And the reality is, if you're outside the park, you are hunting. You're hunting with your camera elk that are hunted with a weapon at the same time. And I promise you, your chances of finding a bull, period, to photograph and get any good images and get any kind of behavior is slim to none. So I totally hear what you guys are saying, and you're spot on. But I think we all have to remember there's this perspective that the average Joe that wants to go out and do this passion, chase this passion, they don't have the time to do what you guys are referring to, which is the right way to do it. But how can I be successful if I don't have these opportunities? You know what I mean?
No, that's what I was alluding to earlier. Exactly that. I mean, it's like you're the number of images that you're going to get if you're going to have to go off the beaten path is going to be, let's say you shoot 100 good images in a weekend or a week or whatever, you might get 10, because it's a whole different ballgame. But I was always willing to do that. For me, that experience far outweighed but I know I missed out, and it used to kill me when I'd go by that big meadow and just know that there's this great, big, beautiful bull out there, or several of them, and I'm driving right by it because I just wanted a different experience. I was always torn. It's like, do I want to go get the solid 100%? I know I'm going to kill it out here, or am I going to go take a big swing and hope that I hit something luckily out in the wood? And I don't know. I agree with you 100%. Yeah, it's definitely. But I think that's going to separate out some people too, right? It's just like 100%. Even hiking for it, you know. A lot of the moose that I've been shooting here in Alaska, it's not an easy gig, man. It's 5 miles at least hiking round trip. That's a minimum. You can do a lot more if you want. And what I like about it is it separates out the, you know, it's that natural separator. It's like some people are willing to, and it's funny. It's like you can see a 2 mile mark. People put in 2 miles, and I don't know what it is. This place that I go, it just seems like you go just past 2 miles, and there's still people, but not the people that are within this 2 mile block. So I don't know. You know, I guess it's, you know, there's no answer.
So can I just give you some word of advice from myself? I'm kind of in that boat where I am in that boat where I don't get the amount of time that some of the other guys do. And so what I've done, to Mike's point and to Mark's point, is I've actually tried to spend a little bit of time in the for sure things. And then when I feel like I've got some stuff that I'm happy with, then I'll go out and take some chances and go out and do some of those backcountry, go chase some bugles, do some of that stuff. And I've been not successful. That's not the word I'm looking for. I've been successful having good experiences doing that. And I think that's a good way to balance it out for the folks that are considering doing something like that.
100%. Yeah, because I don't want to preclude anybody from any possibilities. I mean, it's everybody's park, right? And you should have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's a good approach. Go in and get the sure thing, following the rules or whatever it is, and then, you know, head out on an adventure and see if you can make it even better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was a rabbit hole.
And it's always this charismatic megafauna too, right? Because if we want to go shoot sage grouse, you know, it's basically us, right?
There's nobody out there.
Exactly. Or if you want to go shoot bullfrogs, or if you want to go shoot whatever, I mean,
collared lizards,
you're by yourself, you know. So pick and choose your battles.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to get any. I just don't want it to be a downer. There's so many good things to do out of all this.
Definitely.
Don't get frustrated. You can be frustrated, but don't let it get you, because it's
you know, there's nothing around. Being mad is not going to fix it, right? So I've gotten over it. I mean, it is what it is. It's going to change the way I shoot this year. That's fine. That's all good. So I'll just work around it, and I'll have more opportunities now to do more of that backcountry stuff and try to find some different opportunities.
Right.
So it's just, you know, you got to just make it's a glass half full. So.
Yeah. Yep. I've always looked at it that way too. I mean, it forces you to think outside the box, which is kind of fun.
Yep.
Sometimes, if it works out.
Yep.
When it works out.
When it works out. Yeah.
You look like a hero, not a zero. Oh, man.
We want to wrap it there.
I don't know.
So real quick, before we wrap it, I actually met a fan of the show out in the field, Steve Boyce, and I just wanted to give him a shout out and say thanks for stopping me and saying hey. And I love it when people come up to me and say something in the field when they see me. So please just remember, any of us, I know all of us the same way. If you see us out in the field, make sure you stop and say hey. You never know, might have a sticker or something handy to give you to, you know, it's for stopping by and saying hi. But we do appreciate it. It was great feedback. He wanted to make sure I told him how to make sure I shared that information with the rest of you guys, that he was a big fan and he really enjoyed the show, really enjoyed what we were all doing. And so we wanted to make sure we were keeping it up and putting out episodes every week so he could continue to participate. So thanks, Steve. Appreciate that.
Awesome.
And the other thing is, thank you all for tagging us in your images, because, you know, a lot of you are tagging us individually as well as the podcast page. And everybody's doing some incredible stuff. It makes you want to just get out and up your game.
That's the hard part too, right? Social media has just
Yep.
made you like, oh my gosh, this this standard shot is not gonna. I process images really quickly and I throw them on my phone and I'll use them for like trying to find the right image for social media, and I'm like, nope, 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 nope. It's so hard to find the right image to put up there that hopefully would just get noticed or be a little different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Impressive.
So while the Wild and Exposed crew is trying to up our productivity and the quality of our images, so up yours.
I knew that was coming. I knew it was coming.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Oh, that's funny.
I couldn't
right.
help
And on
it.
that
It was
note,
perfect.
You know, there's been more every week. There seems to be more interaction with listeners, which is definitely
Right.
something we appreciate on all platforms and on Instagram and YouTube as well. Comments and for those of you that aren't aware, more and more of our content is going up on YouTube. So if you want to watch our podcast instead of just listening to it, you can find it on YouTube, and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you're notified when we upload the next one for your viewing enjoyment as well.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review, and make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way. We will be the biggest band in town. Round and round the world we'll go.